it all starts, or the process starts right here, which is the mash tun. I got our equipment from a guy in Colorado who was brewing for about 15 years, and he was retiring, moving to Alaska by himself to build a cabin in the woods and commune with bears and whatever the hell he was going to do. And this was 7 years ago, so he was brewing during the first wave of craft beer in Colorado. These are converted dairy tanks. This was originally one big tank that was converted into a mash tun and a brew kettle. The grain goes in here. We use all Belgian malt, which is grossly expensive, but I want to do things as authentically as possible, so we use all Dingman's malt. Grain goes in here with hot water, and depending on the beer I'm brewing is dependent on the temperature of the water. The higher the temperature, the more unfermentable sugars you're making. The lower the temperature, the more fermentable sugars you're making. I like a very attenuated beer. I want an 8% beer that drinks like it's 6%, not a whole lot of mouthfeel, not real thick. So I go on the lower end. We'll fill it up with hot water in the 140-ish range, and after an hour, hour and a half, what happens is the enzymes that are contained with the grain and the hot water convert the starch in the grain into sugar. The sugar leaches out into the water, and voila, you have the beginnings of beer. There's a false bottom or strainer on the bottom, so we pull off the liquid into the next vessel, which is our kettle. It's gas fired. There's just a big 400,000 BTU burner underneath. It's a glorified turkey fryer, if you will. The liquid goes in here. I'll fill it up to about 240 gallons. I do a 2-hour boil. Most breweries will do an hour, maybe 90 minutes. You know, Dogfish Head brags about their 120. You know, it's boiled for 120 minutes. Big frickin' deal. Every beer you've had tonight is boiled for 2 hours. The 2-hour boil gives you a couple of things. I don't filter anything or add any adjuncts to precipitate filtering. The longer boil helps coagulate some proteins. It helps drop some things out that normally wouldn't drop out. So you get a little cleaner beer, a little clearer beer without having to filter, without having to add adjuncts with a 2-hour boil. At the end of the 2 hours is when whatever additions will go in. If you have the Pays de Soleil gets palmetto berry and hibiscus. Those would go in. The Saison Athene gets the rosemary and black pepper and the chamomile. Those would go in at the end. I whirlpool it. Whirlpooling is just what you're thinking. You want to spin it around. I've got a high-tech piece of equipment over here, the yellow canoe paddle. I get up on the platform and basically get it spinning around. And what that does is the hops, which I skipped over, we use all whole cone hops. The hops, the palmetto berries, hibiscus, whatever we put in the beer, once you spin it around, just by centrifugal force, will mound up in the middle. Let it sit for about 20 minutes until it stops spinning. Then we'll pull the liquid off through a heat exchanger, which is this little silver deal right here. Heat exchanger will knock it down from boiling to whatever the room temperature is or the water temperature is that day. Florida, your groundwater temperature doesn't get real cold except for this time of the year. So half the time I've got to bolster it with copper coil and some ice to knock the temperature down. It gets it down to a reasonable temperature. We run into the fermenters. Up until that portion, most everything we did was pretty standard for other breweries except for the 2-hour boil. Once we get into the fermenters, which are the big round guys here, that's where St. Somewhere kind of steps aside from the majority of other breweries. I ferment in, these are red wine fermenters. They're flat bottom, straight sides, open top. Number one here has the lid off, and it's an open top. I mean, there's nothing sealed about them. This has beer in it, and it's all a fruit fly off of there, but they're open. What that does is it allows whatever wild yeast is in the air to act on the beer along with our house strain of yeast. We pitch our house strain from fermenter to fermenter, and hopefully that's the dominant yeast. And then whatever wild yeast is in the air, whatever Brettanomyces, is secondary, but still plays a pretty big role in the flavor and the attenuation of the beer. These are also, as I mentioned before, flat bottom and straight sides. If you've done any other brewery tours, most breweries use the safe conical fermenters that are sealed, which is easier for the brewery, but not so great on the yeast. The yeast will prefer a bigger surface area, so the flat bottom is better for the yeast. The conical fermenters are really more for ease of use. The yeast, whatever, you dry hop, you put hops in there, they'll all drop into the cone. They could pull that off and pull the beer off above that pile of whatever crap they put in the beer. Here I've got to deal with that on the bottom, and because of that, there's a dump on the very bottom, and there's also a dump on top of the bottom, if you will. Once the beer is fermented,
do you beechwood age?
I do not beechwood age. Well, since you brought that up, beechwood aging, that's not for the wood to permeate into the beer. Beechwood,
for the yeast, right?
Yeah, it's to give the yeast more surface area. So they're fermenting in conical fermenters, but they want to replicate this. That's the whole Budweiser deal.
Right.
I'm not going for the Budweiser deal.
Neither am I.
No.
But I got 2 4-packs at home. I'm gonna dump them out.
You can cook with them. Yeah, you make good, beer chili, beer cheese soup. Again, straight sides, flat bottom. The yeast love it. I don't want anybody climbing up here because it's a little dangerous, but this one is actively fermenting, and you can see it's churning and turning around in there. You really don't get that with a conical fermenter. It'll just foam up and start blowing out the top. Once it's fermented, really the fermentation process here happens in about 5 days. Everything after 5 days is aging. We ferment and age at ambient temperature. This time of the year it's pretty comfortable, it's fine in here. In the summer, gets as high as 90, 95, 98. That's what we ferment at. That's what we age at. You can't do that with any other yeast other than a Saison yeast or house yeast or wild yeast. After the fermentation is done, we'll have a 10-day, give or take a week, aging process, and we test it basically by pulling some off, giving it a little smell, a little taste, sensory test. If it's ready to go to package, it'll go either in the keg or the bottle. Everything we do is naturally carbonated and unfiltered. So the draft beer you've had, we are one of the few breweries that distribute outside the brewery that are dumb enough to naturally carbonate in the keg. Very risky, very hard to do. The Caitlin is a good example. Pour a lot of foam. That happens about 10% of the time, 90% of the time they pour fine. But keg conditioning, you get a lot more stability. You can have the beer in your garage for 8 months. It's going to be fine. A filtered and pasteurized beer, if it's unrefrigerated for a week, it's toast. It's garbage. Our beer in the bottle and the keg, one and the same. Same product. Ages a little better in the bottle because it's also re-fermented in the bottle as it is in the keg. Bottles tend to age a little better because they're at the retail level, they're not kept cold, so they're kept on the shelf where they continue to ferment and age because of the yeast that's in there. The kegs will do the same thing if they're allowed to rest at room temp. That's the brewing process. The St. Somewhere process, or the St. Somewhere deal, is we've been around about 6 years, a little over, between 5 and 6 years. We are Florida's most widely distributed brewery out of this little half-ass operation. We're in 42 states. We're in Denmark. We're in parts of Canada, Quebec mainly, soon to be in Australia. So we're also exporting out of here. We were the first, let's say, Saison brewery in the U.S. I mean, there have been others that have fallen in behind us, but we were the first ones dumb enough to get into this and make this our only product. I guess the closest would have been Jolly Pumpkin, which his level's way up here. He does all barrel aging. Wouldn't really call them Saisons, but they're all, really good sours. Ron's my hero, so I kind of took what he was doing, changed it a little bit to something that would fit with Florida, and that's where we are.